Boys, everything but gas.
Rule number 52, face off. Rule number 62, interference. Rule number 45, board checking. Rule number 25, to play the game, use a puck. The Stanley Cup playoffs tonight at 7:30. Face it, the NHL rules on ESPN2.
On draft day 2 on ESPN2, 150 picks have been made after the next one, and Miami's on the clock. We total 254 picks in this National Football League draft. Let's refresh your memory of what's been going on the last 6 selections in the draft. See some players from some of the bigger schools, in Houston and Georgia and North Carolina, recently selected, and then Christian Peter, defensive lineman out of Nebraska, taken by the New England Patriots, who earlier selected Teddy Bruschi, today selected Chris Sullivan, so they're obviously trying to address a defensive line need.
I'll tell you, when you watch Christian Peter, he's an active kid. And of course, the defensive tackles, you go back to John Perella and Danny Noonan, they've turned out a lot of players over the years. But I think the concern is, with the great strength that Christian Peter has, you know, is he just too stiff to be a very good, a very athletic defensive tackle? And I think that's why he's still here. Very productive in their defense, although it dropped off some as a senior. But when you look at Christian Peter, that's the concern. Is he just a good college player with somewhat limited pro potential?
Probably not affecting his draft status, certainly to the effect that people talked about with Lawrence Phillips, but there were off-the-field problems as well with Christian Peter and involvement with the law in Lincoln, Nebraska. Let's bring in Chris Fowler and company once again from our ESPN studios. Chris.
Thanks, Christian Peter. If you watched him play in college, certainly a fearsome, how you doing? Certainly a fearsome defensive tackle, a guy that really intimidated offensive linemen and manhandled people, played with a lot of fire, but also had a lot of fire off the field as well. It did get him in trouble with the law, as Mike Tirico mentioned. Mike Lombardi, there is some baggage there. There's some concerns about him.
Well, I think one of the things he's got going for him, he was picked by Bill Parcells, who's a Jersey guy. This guy happens to be a Jersey guy, so there's obviously a connection here. And when you go to play for Bill, I think Bill can control some of those situations that happen in his unique fashion.
So Bill Parcells, is he confident that means he can deal with Christian Peter and coach him?
Well, I think 2 things are going to happen. Either Christian Peter's going to conform or he's not going to be a New England Patriot. I think that's pretty much the bottom line there. I think one thing you see with Bill, it's either the players join his program or they're going to have some other program, no matter what the talent level is. He's been successful with the Giants, and he's done that there, so obviously it's going to happen here with Christian Peter.
That aside, as a football player, will he be a success in the NFL?
I think what they're looking for with Christian Peter is a guy to play inside, power the guards, hold up, playing in a 4-3 scheme. If that's what they decide to go with, they need some big guys in there. They haven't drafted defensive linemen very much in the past 3 years that have made their team, so they need some young defensive linemen to develop and bring along.
Well, there are a lot of people in the Big 8, now the Big 12 conference, that are glad that Christian Peter has moved on out of there. He has been a force in that conference in the last few years. Now to Sal Palantonio. Sal?
Chris, I'm very surprised, and I think a lot of people will be surprised the Philadelphia Eagles passed on Christian Peter. They need young defensive line talent. Instead, they took a linebacker out of Georgia, Whit Marshall. Doesn't really solve their inside linebacker problems. As you know, they lost Kurt Goveda to free agency. San Diego picked him up for a pretty good sum. The Eagles did not match it, decided to let him go, even though he was the leading tackler. In a 4-3 defense, you've got to have an experienced middle linebacker as well as somebody you're bringing along. And right now, they're counting on James Willis to fill that bill. He's a journeyman, 3 years in the league. That's not really going to get it done. Let's go back to Mike Tirico in New York.
Okay, Sal, so you're interested that they pass on Christian Peter, a guy from just up the road in New Jersey. His brother Jason is still at Nebraska playing football at Lincoln next year. We mentioned Christian Peter's problems with the law. Back in '94, he pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor third-degree sexual assault. His sentence was 18 months of probation for that incident back in 1994. Also joining us here at the draft headquarters in New York is Mark Malone. Mark.
Yeah, Mike, as you mentioned, Christian Peter, you know, I talked to the New York Jets. I was there yesterday at their facility. They were looking at defense today, especially at defensive tackles, defensive ends. I asked him about Christian Peter and whether or not the off-the-field incident would be a problem for them. He said that it was a concern for them. They wouldn't stray away from him, but it was certainly a concern. I talked to some other general managers in this league who said they had taken him off the board, that his off-the-field problems did affect, you know, their thoughts of Christian Peter. This is a guy that's very quick and strong, as Mel mentioned. He's very athletic and very aggressive, and it could have filled the needs of teams like the New York Jets. But there's no question in my mind, after talking to different personnel people around this league, that his off-the-field problems really cost him to drop in this draft. Mike?
Okay, Mark, so we'll see how Bill Parcells and company will deal with Christian Peter as he gets an opportunity to make a name for himself and a career in the National Football League. The last 3 picks and 4 picks here in this 5th round have been defensive linemen. The Miami Dolphins, among that group of 3 straight defensive linemen. We're going to take a step back and look at the entire draft for Miami. And as you see, running backs will appear prominently. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in round 3 yesterday. This morning with Stanley Pritchett, the fullback out of South Carolina, then Jarris McPhail from East Carolina, and most recently a defensive tackle from Tennessee in Shane Burton. Chris Mortensen is at Dolphins headquarters, where Jimmy Johnson and company have been quite busy in the war room today. Mort.
Yeah, Mike, and they have taken some running backs, but they've got some big 300-pound bodies that the offensive line is going to have to work against this summer in training camp. Shane Burton, 6'5", 300-pounder, and he's got great size, and he's another one of those guys like Darrell Gardner, a very big guy, and although he's obviously isn't first or second round material, the Dolphins are getting big bodies to play inside. It's been a very interesting scene in the war room. Jimmy clearly enjoying himself, communicating with everybody. That might have been a picture of Burton. I guess the guy must have been a workout guy, but hey, Jimmy's been yucking it up with all of his staff members there. He's been having a little bit of lunch. People know that his favorite food is nachos. There he is, dipping in there. So he made the pick, and now he's dipping into the nachos. Look at this. This is tremendous. Look at that. Great form right there. And that's Jimmy Johnson at his best, folks. Football, nachos. It's the American way. And Jimmy building on defense, building on offense. Let's go back to New York now with Mike Tirico.
We are quite envious, believe us. Jimmy doing a good job with the nachos. I don't know if you saw SportsCenter, the early SportsCenter on ESPN on Friday night. Jimmy Johnson wearing a Dolphins golf shirt, that kind of gray golf shirt that Don Shula wore so often. I looked at it, and it looked right. It fit, and I'm very surprised that a guy who we associated for so long with Dallas looks to be an immediate fit, just visually, at least in your mind, with Miami. Now, the Dolphins draft this day. Why are we paying so much attention? It's because this guy has pulled a pretty few good strings in the late rounds, Mel.
He's done a great job. I think, having all those extra picks has really helped out. There's no question about that. But these are a lot of players that the teams thought just couldn't play. And that's when you get into these later rounds, a lot of these guys can. I think the LaCurtis Jones, the linebacker from Baylor, 5'11 and a half, 205. A lot of teams probably wouldn't even have him on their board. But in Jimmy's defense, he likes the fast, athletic linebackers. Dixon Edwards was undersized. Aaron Smith, by NFL standards, somewhat undersized, but they played very effectively in his scheme. And LaCurtis Jones at 5'11 and a half, 205 is strong and athletic and fast, and at least has an opportunity down there to compete for a job.
And I look at guys like Brock Marion and Larry Brown, who appreciate the fact that Jimmy Johnson took a chance on them in such a late round, that they felt obligated to go out and play even way over their heads at times to show their appreciation for the job that Jimmy Johnson did in drafting him in the late rounds. And when you get into this stage, when you get guys that are appreciative of the fact that you give them an opportunity to play in the NFL, which is very, very special, you're going to get their best week in and week out.
You really believe that appreciative nature? It strikes me as such a business that I don't see that as factoring in.
Because you can look at it, you can either be a seventh rounder or a free agent or not even have a chance at all. And when a guy picks you and says that he's looking for you to come in and make a contribution, you get yourself motivated and get yourself in shape to go out and make special plays. And I think that's what all those guys did in Dallas.
Well, Jimmy Johnson, of course, in Miami, replacing Don Shula, and we heard Don's son, Mike Shula, now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, mentioned to us earlier that he talked to Dad, and Dad woke him up the day before the draft. Johnson versus Shula in draft hindsight, what they've been able to do the last couple of years, and you see that Darryl Johnston has succeeded more than Sammy Smith. Comparing Cowboy to Dolphin, right to left, Eric Williams, and what the Dolphins were able to do in '91. Randall Hill eventually came back after a trade. Darren Woodson's success and the lack of success in '92 for the Miami Dolphins. Not just Don Shula, other people involved, but Jimmy Johnson's had success with the Dolphins, and he hopes to continue as we watch Jimmy eating nachos and laughing it up in the war room in South Florida.
The Volvo 850 Turbo and the brand new BMW 328i. 0 to 60, anyone? How about a quarter mile? The ultimate driving machine outdone by a Volvo wagon is nothing sacred.
Extreme heat. It can cause chemical changes in motor oil that can destroy your